Okay, in this session, we're going to talk a little bit about Saint Augustine or Augustine and Saint Anselm of Canterbury. These two individuals represent the pinnacle of Christian theology, especially as it relates to Platonic or Neo-Platonic thought in theology. They are incredibly astute thinkers, and they are extremely formative for a lot of Christian theology. You're going to get tasked with taking a look at Augustine, Anselm, or St. Thomas Aquinas, which will be the next video session. And really making good connection between the existing sort of philosophical underpinnings that they're trying to use as they explain Christian theology. And so we're going to be looking at how their Christian ideas and their Christian theologies are really springboarding from older philosophy as a means to explain the truth. They're not trying to argue that these other philosophies are accurate and they're sort of making them Christian. What they're trying to do is use those classical pieces of philosophy as a means to explain exactly what it is that they believe and why what they believe is true within Christian theology. So, let's get started. St. Augustine, or St. Augustine, is from Hippo, St. Augustine of Hippo. He is responsible for a work titled The City of God. It's a rather Christian Neo-Platonist work. It should sound, the title, City of God, should ring some bells for you about Plato's Republic. Okay? He really started on his journey in theology with a pursuit of wisdom in its purest essence, wisdom alone. Okay? And this idea that whatever exists is knowable by wisdom, okay? And he's really looking for answers to what is wisdom when he begins his philosophic career. He will eventually become a convert to Christianity. His City of God is his greatest work, and following in the footsteps of Plato's Republic, what he's trying to establish is the true church of God as this spiritual, heavenly city that is totally distinct from our material world, the city of man. Likewise, Plato's Republic is really oriented around what Plato believes to be the perfect conception of human governance. Augustine's idea is much more Christian in its theology. It's not about perfect human governance. It's about this is what the church ought to be because of these true theological precepts and principles. Sort of building on the idea of the city of God, the New Jerusalem, that we see in the text of Revelation. In contrast with that is the city of man, this characteristic city that is decidedly not of God, okay, that is corrupt by sin and the material world around it. Now, in that regard, Augustine and Plato share a little bit of commonality. They both seriously distrust the material world. Remember, for Plato, it's this world of corrupted forms where there are elements of the truth there, but it is not true reality or true substance. That true substance and reality only exists beyond in the metaphysical, in the pure world of ideas. Okay? Augustine's City of God, City of Man sounds a little bit like that. He is attempting to establish what it is to be the true church, this spiritual city constructed and created by God, that is distinct from the world around us, that is other than the world around us, because our God is other than. Our God is transcendent. He is beyond this sphere of reality. He, in fact, is the essence of all that is good and wise and perfect. And so what Augustine finds in his conversion to Christianity is the answers in wisdom and the answers to those goodness questions, this pursuit he began in philosophic study, he finds its completion in Christian theology. It is not metaphysical or otherworldly reality that answers his question. It is the transcendent God of the Scriptures and the Church that is the essence of everything that is good and wise and perfect. So ultimately, what St. Augustine comes down to is whatever exists in the truest sense of existence is good. And evil isn't actually a substance or an existence of its own, but it's a perversion of the good. So for us, as human beings, okay, we exist and we are good. However, we in our sinful condition pervert the will of God, and we pervert what God intended in our creation as good as we turn away from God in sin. And so, really for Augustine, what happens here is, in human sin, we turn away from the pure substance of God, the pure existence itself, and toward things that are tarnished, that are poor imitations, that are corrupted replicas of the true substance, God himself. And in that, he sounds rather Platonic, right? There is true reality that exists out here. This true substance and the forms we experience here are corrupted. The difference for St. Augustine here is that it is not simply because I am in the physical world or material that my form is corrupted, or the form of the table is corrupted from the table of tables in the metaphysical. It is this turning of the will, this perversion, okay, of my will against the true substance of God that creates the corruption, that creates the problem and the disconnect between the city of man and the city of God. And so, for Augustine, if we, as the church, can progress toward, through the work of God in the church and in our lives, and our participation in that divine work, if we can progress toward being the city of God and remove these perversions of our will, again, in participation with God, not on our own merit, we can become this city of God, this pure church, this true spiritual body that is the body of Christ. Okay. Now, St. Anselm of Canterbury. He stands firmly in the tradition of St. Augustine, and he really knows that he stands firmly in the tradition of Augustine, and probably knows full well that he stands in the tradition of Platonic thought. He willingly acknowledged, really just sort of brutal intellectual honesty here, that it is faith-seeking understanding that is at work in Anselm's theology. He is all about faith coming to an understanding of who and what God is. He says, I believe in order to understand. And that is the practice of theology for Anselm of Canterbury. It is faith at work seeking rational understanding. And when rational understanding comes up short of the faith, we default to the faith. Just because I cannot understand it doesn't make the revealed truth not true. It simply means that I am at a place where I cannot understand it. And so in contemplative prayer, throwback to the Desert Fathers and the role of contemplation here. In contemplative prayer, I begin to seek and gain understanding of who and what God is. Okay? we, with powers of reason and rational thought that God has given us, coupled with prayer, can come to understanding of these truths about God. He is beyond us. Anselm will argue that contained within God is the essence of all of the good that we can know rationally. Even if we cannot understand it fully, it is our faith at work to understand as best as we can those truths about God. We don't reject the faith, again, operating from proper Christian doctrine, from belief as faith, right? These things that I believe about God, these truths, these orthodox theological opinions, and my practice of faith and trust and belief in God himself. It is faith-seeking understanding. If I cannot understand, then I continue in contemplative prayer. I don't reject the proper theology simply because I don't understand it. I seek understanding in the practices of my faith. And for Anselm, then, he finds the eternal and the immutable truths of God. He finds the transcendence of God, much like Plato found the transcendence of the metaphysical. He finds these things to be absolute fact. But he says, listen, when I can't understand, I go to prayer. When I can't understand, I seek God who provides for me the understanding that I cannot ascertain on my own. Okay? What he's probably most famous for, though, besides his approach, what he's probably most famous for is the ontological argument for the existence of God. St. Anselm of Canterbury's ontological argument works something like this. God is the greatest thing that can be thought. There is no greater thing than God that we can think of. If there were something greater, that thing would be God. And so the greatest thing that we can conceptualize is God. Second, it is greater to exist than to not exist. So, if we can conceive in our human minds of this great being that we call God, and it is greater to exist than not exist, then God must exist. And he must exist in the essence. Let me take that back. And he must exist in such a way that the essence of all good things, love and light, righteousness, justice, mercy, grace, all of these things must in their essence exist in the core of being of what it is to be God. And so God is the greatest thing that can be thought, because contained within him is the essence of all of these great things. And it is greater to exist than not exist. Therefore, God exists as the greatest thing that can be thought. This sort of ontological argument, for Anselm anyway, proves the existence of God. Remember, he starts with faith, and it's faith in action seeking understanding that leads him back to faith. He's okay with the fact that he's come full circle here. It doesn't bother him. This is what he set out to do. It's provide rational, as best as he can, rational explanation for the person and the nature and the total transcendence of God. And in this regard, he stands squarely in a sort of Platonist philosophical mold. Let us take that which is transcendent, understand it as best as we can, and have it inform the life we live in what is immanent to us. For Anselm of Canterbury, God is transcendent because he is the greatest thing that can be thought. In him is the essence of all of these transcendent things: love, light, righteousness, justice, etc. And so we find in God this greatness that exceeds all other things, much like Plato found in the metaphysical the greatness and the perfection of the world he saw here. Okay? And so Anselm stands in this weird place where he's in agreement with Plato on there is a transcendent, but he's in disagreement with Plato in the sense that for Anselm, that transcendent is the person of God that is the greatest of all things. Okay? This is two of the three that are going to become rather important for you, Augustine, Anselm, and then St. Thomas Aquinas. So go ahead and take another look or a look ahead at the screencast regarding St. Thomas Aquinas before you pick one of these three thinkers and begin to pull this apart. If you focused on Plato as a student of Plato's thought, then Augustine and Anselm would probably be good places for you to go. Picking one of those two individuals as your sort of theological teacher in this section of your project. Okay, we will pick up with some discussion of Augustine and Anselm in class.